appointment. So I'm always very conscious of existing business owners, and without hearing, that you've spoken to them, and that, I mean, there is the potential that that lot that's signed for 45 minutes will get utilized for 2 hours per car. And I don't want that to come back to the village and say, how did you, a problem that we didn't understand before we considered. So that's my only, I think it's just the 60 to 120 minute parking, along with the potentially up to 8 doctors, which exceeds the 45-minute limit. And in both structures, there's spots that are for, and then because this lot is almost at Capitol, it's a little different, because if they can't park because it's 45 minutes, like if that can't be discussed and understood, then where do they all go? My guess is Oakland Avenue, right? Or there, and they just bring again, it'll just impact the tenant that currently, resides, which would be Walgreens. So again, I would prefer that it had been discussed and we had the document in front of us and read it, and the public read it and could comment on that document, and to understand the regulations a little better and the expectations of the neighboring properties and the owner of the structure. So that's just what I was hoping for.
So what would you do different? I mean, there's 40-something 2-hour spots and a smattering of 45-minute spots. The number of spots covered is covered. So now you read the document, what would be different?
As long as, can you confirm that all of the spots are available based on need or expectations in the structure? Is that what you're saying?
The other businesses around the corner, do they count on those spots too? There's a number of buildings that go around the corner there.
We don't have that information.
And I'll just, from a staff perspective, getting a comprehensive understanding of who's using that lot and who's, for all we know, the Rock House has 5 spaces, but that's a private deal between the owner of the lot and the village. So when it comes to me as a staff member, and I don't know the background details of who's already reserved things, like Commissioner Kelly Miller said, like perhaps North Shore Bank had an agreement to use some of those spots. I know in the metro market we've discussed that the Ruckus might have an agreement to use some of those. The previous applicant wanted to use some of those. It's possible that those deals are being made without village knowledge, just because it's between private entities at that point. I don't have any reason to believe that there are those agreements within this structure, but ideally the owner would at some point be required to share that with us so that we would have the information that we would know, oh, there actually are 60 spaces available, because 10 years ago we said they would be. But I don't know if things have changed in the past that might have modified that agreement or the understanding of the document. Regardless of this application, I think from a staff level, I would love to know that on a day-to-day basis, when these questions come into me, I would be able to reference a document. So with or without action here, I will say that I will definitely try my best to follow up and get that information. I know that it's come up at the Metro Market lot numerous times, including with the previous applicant, right? So I think the village is relying on those spots being available, and I think it's in the village's best interest to have that documented and clearly, understood and enforceable, so that we know how to best treat these applications. So ideally, it would have been, submitted and confirmed that we would be having this conversation. With or without whatever motion happens here, I will do my best to get it, because it's difficult for me to do my job without it. So that's just my perspective. I don't know if that helps or hinders what your decision is, but.
Yes.
But in this case, Attorney Bear, reading that document, are you satisfied that they do have an easement on a certain number of parking spots over there?
That's what it says, it's called a perpetual easement.
For 10 spaces or for?
How many, we were looking at it,
For 10 space, the easement is for 10 spaces directly for that building. And then the easement for public parking for our customers and invitees, that was the clause that you had read. That any of the additional public parking would then be reserved for any patients or customers.
And the easement itself.
Or available, right,
Yeah,
available to
available.
them, not reserved, available to them.
Commissioner,
Sandy Park Planning Director, there is that surface parking lot behind their current building, and then that extends all the way to Capitol with North Shore Bay Casket. Is that public parking, or are those spaces assigned for the various businesses that work in that tower?
I think they're all controlled by the corner, whatever the address is there, the taller structure.
Okay, so they couldn't just have their employees park over there and walk a block?
They could if they have an agreement with that property owner. It's possible.
okay. So we have an amended motion on the floor. Do you want to read it back? And we will, seeing there's no further dialogue, we will take a vote.
I'll read it again. I have that Ms. Patel moved to amend the current motion to state that we would be confirming the public parking is available and remain at the current levels.
Do we need to withdraw that since we confirmed, or?
Well, we haven't confirmed the number, we just confirmed that they're available.
Okay.
That they're available.
And I think it'd also be good that they formally submit that, so that we have it on file
Okay,
with
very
the
good.
application.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second on the floor. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nick?
Okay, the amended motion carries. Therefore, we don't vote on the motion below, correct? The original motion?
You just vote on, that's the new motion.
That was right.
That now.
Now you vote on the motion.
Okay,
Okay, so-
exactly.
Okay, so now we're voting on the same, now it's the main motion. So all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, nay?
Well, no, because it was a motion to amend my motion, was it not?
Yeah.
And then
First
it
vote.
passed.
That passed.
So then we just restate it as the amended motion.
Then I'm a nay.
Okay. All right, thank you so much. Do you have a question?
So what did we just do?
So we approved the both,
Amended.
and this was the amended special exception, which just means they need to submit the parking document that they have, and Bart will confirm that those spaces are there in perpetuity.
So we're not deferring, it's just coming.
Just going to staff unless there's a problem.
It would only come back if
If it wasn't.
I just want to make sure.
Okay, all right, thank you so much for attending, and good luck with your renovation.
Sue, can I just get your names? I just want to make sure I got your spellings right. I'm sorry. Yeah, I just want to make sure I got both of your names.
Is she actually there? Yeah. Okay, good, good.
Crazy Tuesday night? Sir?
Oh, yeah, I would not have gotten that right.
How are you?
Oh, you're both. Okay. All right, got it. Thank you so
Have a good
much.
Did you want to take a lunch break or?
Oh, yeah, we should.
I think the last one should be brief.
All right. My glasses. So we'll move on to the next item for discussion. Discussion of conditional use fee schedule, including engineering, staff fees, and I'll turn it over to our director.
So this came up at last meeting when we were discussing the original daycare's application and how I didn't have essentially a lot of leeway in getting our village engineers review and approval of it, or review and recommendation of it, because I have to find a way to pay that fee at some point. So this kind of came up with that. in mind. Other applications that the Department of Development has, we say, the fee is $200 plus engineering fees, right? So in theory, they would have submitted their application, and then any invoices that Mustafa would have had regarding their review would have been invoiced back to them directly. Ideally, that'd be paid before the meeting happens, so that we can confirm that payment happens, subject, whether it's approved or denied. This is the second time it's come to my attention. Actually, the first one was for the Sendex building when there was a previous applicant looking to do a drive-through use there, and I utilized Mustafa to get some professional opinion on that, and that I believe was invoiced to us at $40. And the department essentially ate those costs as opposed to the applicant. I'm just looking in terms of direction from the planning commission to confirm whether or not there's a desire to recommend that those costs, and perhaps you could cap it at a certain level, engineering costs up to a certain amount, if you felt that was burdensome to the applicant. But I'm just looking for direction as to allowing me to take that to the village board for approval. We are hoping to review the fee schedule prior to the next budgeting season. And so it'd be I'm just looking for guidance from the planning commission whether or not you feel it's an acceptable proposal to say conditional use permits are the fee plus engineering fees as applicable.
Is that typical for other communities?
It can go either way. I will say in West Dallas, the conditional use permit fee was $500, and that was a lot more than some people needed to pay, but it was also a lot less than some people paid, so it kind of balanced itself out, right? So
What's ours?
125. And so we're on the lower end of the actual fee, but then
They also have an engineer on staff, don't they?
correct. And so in West Dallas we have those, and then we would be able to help each other out with in terms of that. So if you used 2 hours of their time, it was covered by that fee in theory, right? Here we have a contracted engineer. My department gets invoiced for his opinion, which was the tricky part in the last meeting. Where I didn't feel like I had enough information to start asking him questions, but I don't ask him prematurely and get charged without having something to review. So in this case, I was happy to ask him to review the document because that was a very clear direction. But once again, I will be invoiced for that review fee, and maybe that's acceptable to either the village board or the planning commission. I would just, in my opinion, it's a lot easier for me to have the direction to be able to utilize that procedure. When an application comes in, I can say, hey, I'm going to need to take this to the engineer, and you're going to be invoiced for it, just so you know. And you could cap it if you wanted to, but I just, in my mind, that's a lot easier for me to operate within to have that direction.
Can I just ask this question? So I talked with Bart after the last meeting, and in Milwaukee and in West Dallas, and correct me if I'm wrong, but most conditional uses that are talking about traffic are reviewed by your engineer. I mean, it's very hard you have the burden of proof to deny something, and you don't have information from an engineer, then you're not really conforming to the data that you need. So to make that decision. So I 100% agree that it should be reviewed and an engineer's input should be provided to us in order for us to make an educated and legal decision. Now the question is, in bigger cities, they have one on staff, so there's no extra cost to budget. And so you're not, when it's just staff time, that's already in the budget. So in the villages that are smaller and you have a contracted employees, then you're being asked, if you have no budget line, it's not in the current budget, you've got to cut something to get that information that you're required to kind of have. So I did not realize that. I am 100% in support of charging. My only question is, we have a lot of conditional uses that so for real conditional uses and ones that we feel really strongly about, it makes sense to charge the residents or the citizens that are applicants. But then we have a bunch that we may want to take off the table at some point so they don't have to get reviewed at all. So that's the only thing I'm struggling with of the timing, and a cap probably makes sense. I remember reviewing the village fees and I was like, where's the cap on some of these? Because you don't want a resident coming into a process and not knowing it's going to take them stuff at 8 hours and this is how much, and maybe they can't afford. So it's always better to be predictable with applicants and developers and business owners. It's easier for them to factor in. Commissioner Wickling.
How often do we have Mustafa review residential stuff? Probably not that often.
Residential stuff, no.
Right, so maybe if we do a difference between a residential and a commercial fee, and to be honest, I'm more of a fan of the Stalis model of just increasing that commercial fee, because if we're trying to encourage more development here, if I were coming in on the commercial side, you know, like taking a stab at this stuff, putting it on the fee, I know we have to sit through some of this and go through it, but at the same time, if you're gonna, and a cap might be appropriate too, but it's nicer just to know what you're going in, not that it's gonna be a cap of, it's a $300 fee and then a cap of $500 in engineering fees. Well then, you know, then you gotta decide, well, is it worth $800? You know, I think that starts with making it a tough conversation for some of the size businesses we have.
And I think that's, so, in response to that, I totally agree. A fee will allow, if you say you wanted the total to be 500, or whatever Barb would recommend and staff to us, but